Hi, Mickey. Mickey, for our listening audience, why don't you tell us what that sound was?
Listening audience, why don't you tell us what that sound was?
Oh, whoa, that is no low-tech parrot you're wielding.
Oh, whoa, that is no low-tech parrot you're wielding.
I gotta say, you've outdone yourself. Mickey. Okay, put a lid on it, bird. For those of you who are just listening to this, that was a giant stuffed parrot whose specialty is apparently repeating whatever is said in a slightly altered tone of voice.
Now it's going to repeat what I say.
Mickey, I think within moments this gag may get old, but persist
Hi,
as
Bob.
long as you would like.
Don't be so sure. It may come in handy in later segments.
Well, it cuts down on the amount of work we have to do by exactly 50%.
No, I figured that for my impending, Senate campaign.
Oh, you mean Kamala? Are you going for
Kamala Harris's seat?
Kamala's seat?
I need a surrogate because I feel that the problem last time wasn't my ideas or personality. It was a failure of communication, Bob. So
what we had here was a failure to communicate?
Correct.
Well, you got that problem solved. I'm a little insulted that you didn't ask me to be your surrogate. But speaking of parrots, Mickey, I think before we go further, we should thank the many viewers and or listeners who immediately after the unveiling of the Parrot Room, the Patreon Parrot Room page last week, committed their hard-earned wages to support the cause of reckless pronouncement. That's our cause.
Yes.
And as well gained access to the Parrot Room. Although I doubt that was the primary motivation. I think it was largely altruistic.
Thank you, patrons.
No, I don't think we should give that away for free. See, I think they should have had to pay for that.
There'll be more of it later.
That parrot is going into the Parrot Room and not coming out, folks. I hope you enjoyed that one visit.
There'll be more of it later. No, we're off to a good start.
Hundreds of people.
Despite.
And we'll have more to say at the end of this podcast about that. But did you want to say something else now? Thank you.
No, so far so good. Despite some initial glitches.
We'll talk about those.
But no, thank you. And it's only $5.
It's all good.
Anyway, so what do you want to talk about?
I don't know. Should we talk COVID or
Let's take Kamala first.
Kamala then COVID?
Yeah.
Okay. What's your take on Kamala?
Well, I see her as sort of like Faye Dunaway. Faye Dunaway it's probably insulting to Faye Dunaway. Faye Dunaway is a great actress.
Not as insulting as what you said last week, but we'll get back to that.
What did I say? People said I made Kamala Harris faces last.
Yeah, I was going to read that commenter's
but I
remark.
didn't. I don't remember doing that. Did I do that? Anyway.
You were saying that she had plastic surgery and citing what you saw as evidence.
Well, whatever she had, it's working. She looks great. So the Faye Dunaway, she's a great actress. I have no clear impression of her. She doesn't play the same character every time. I couldn't really tell you what she looks like. She's in Chinatown. She's in Mommy Dearest. She's great, but she's got this sort of amorphous look to her. And Kamala is that way politically, not physically. I know what she looks like. Politically, she's sort of all over the lot, and I don't have a clear identity. I mean, Elizabeth Warren gives her stump speech. You know who she is. Yeah. She is a nerdy academic from Harvard who has a naderite desire to bring corporations to heel. It's a very limited vision. It's not an expansive vision of social justice. It's sort of law school-y and naderite, but you know who she is. There's no doubt in your mind who you're voting for, and you're comfortable with it because you know who you're voting for. Kamala is just sort of an empty vessel of ambition that you sort of don't know why is she running? What does she want to do in the world aside from the fact that it's the top job? So we have two candidates, Biden and Harris, who don't really want to run for president to do anything just because they think they can do a good job and it's the top job and they're ambitious. And Kamala is worse than Biden because Biden at least has accrued some causes over the last 20 years. So my basic take is she's ruthlessly ambitious, and what the hell has she done? And there's at least a 50% possibility that voters won't like her.
What's the other evidence that she's ruthlessly ambitious aside from her takedown of her friend Joe Biden in that debate?
Oh, I mean, there's a piece in Politico where it talks about how she rose in San Francisco politics, which is pretty ruthless in terms of she ran against her old boss. She, attacked him viciously in a debate. These things
happen. Politics ain't beanbag.
Yeah, but I mean, she has a pretty meteoric rise. She's been in the Senate for like a week and a half.
So did Barack Obama. But would you say he had no ideological core?
No, he did have an ideological core, and he had a selling proposition, which is that great speech he gave in
at the convention,
at the Kerry convention, where he said, "There's no red America and blue America." And that's what sold him to the American people. Mm-hmm. He wrote a book, sort of saying what he wanted to do, and they had given him some legislative achievements to build his career. I mean, maybe it was a gift from the local state legislators, but he had shepherded some bills through the Illinois legislature. So, that's something. It's not nothing.
So are her two big things? She has been state attorney general and then senator for like 2 or 3 years. That's
a district attorney, state attorney general, and then senator.
But very little experience in legislative politics.
Correct.
Okay.
Biden has huge experience, so that's not a defect in the ticket.
Well, they'll be surrounded by experience compared to the Trump administration. They'll be staffed with experience. But
I highly recommend this Politico article, which Josh Barrow turned me on to today, about why the Obama people disdained Biden, and even sort of to this day disdain Biden. And why he passed over Biden and Obama in sort of anointing Hillary as his successor and discouraging Biden from running.
What's the short answer to why they didn't like Biden?
Well, he's not an intellectual. He's not a technocrat. He doesn't come up with the right policy. He's an unguided missile and a schmoozer, and they are technocrats. And the piece effectively makes the point that, which I think the Obama people probably realized, is that they needed a schmoozer. That Obama was a terrible legislative salesman, and Biden is a people person. He has those virtues, but he's not as smart as he thinks he is, and he's not as smart as the Obama people. So the Obama people look down their nose at him, and he repays the favor. I mean, I don't think the Pod Save America people are in for huge love from the Biden camp. They're Obama people and Hillary people.
That's an interesting point. Well, they were, as I said, a couple of them were implicitly anti-Kamala, although, of course, they're singing her praises now, but they made the explicit case for Susan Rice back when that was still in play. So speaking of both Kamala and Obama, has Trump already gone birther on us with Kamala? I mean...
That was bizarre. I mean, under those criteria, I couldn't run for president.
Well, not only that, but did you hear what Trump said?
Child of immigrants.
No, there's two issues. There's the fact that some lawyer somewhere is raising questions about the fact that although she was born in America, neither of her parents were citizens at the time, even though in general natural-born citizen has been taken to mean that just that you were born, if you're born in the U.S.
I didn't realize that.
Right?
So they're making the anchor baby case. Okay.
They are making that, but the way Trump put it is what's bizarre. Well, maybe not for Trump, but here's what he said. I didn't see it, but I'm reading this from a news account. He said in some, press conference to some reporter, he said, I just heard today that she doesn't meet the requirements. And by the way, the lawyer that wrote that piece is a very highly qualified, very talented lawyer. Yeah, I always trust Donald Trump to evaluate lawyers for me. This piece, it This was in the BBC, I think. Wait, let me finish the quote. It gets amazing. He says, I have no idea if that's right. I would have assumed the Democrats would have checked that out before she gets chosen to run for vice president. Here's the good part. But that's a very serious. They're saying that she doesn't qualify because she wasn't born in this country. No, that's not the case. This is flat out birtherism. We all know she was born in this country.
He said she wasn't born in the country?
He's kind of saying, so you're saying that they're saying that you're saying that they're saying, distancing himself from it. But the same
now I understand
old shit.
The argument is that her parents, unlike my parents, weren't citizens at the time of her birth.
Right.
And so, but under that theory, there is a credible, possibly losing, but worth a Supreme Court case argument that the doctrine that if you're born in the country, you're an automatic citizen is not, in fact, what the Constitution means.
But the consensus view is that it does mean that, right?
Well, yeah, but the consensus view is wrong on a lot of things. There's no controlling Supreme Court precedent. It's a footnote in a Justice Brennan opinion or something.
But no less a conservative legal scholar than Eugene Volokh has weighed in on exactly this case and written a very considered piece about this, saying that this is bullshit and she's a citizen. You respect Eugene Volokh, surely.
I respect Eugene Volokh. I don't follow him slavishly.
Well, I recommend it in this case.
But he's a very, very smart man. I guess the question is, sort of nobody is questioning she's a citizen. So once you accept
that's what they're questioning.
Or are they questioning whether she can run for president?
Well, that's the bottom line, but I thought that was by way of look, she was definitely natural born. If they're conceding she's a citizen, then she's a natural born citizen. I don't know, but this is this will probably go away. Yeah. I just couldn't believe that Trump.
It's more complicated than I'd realized.
Mickey, please don't give aid and comfort to birtherism. To quasi-birth.
They're not saying she was born outside the geographic confines of the United States.
My main point is that Trump took the occasion to give wings to that crazy, unfounded claim. And he just defies. Which brings us back to Kamala, because it's like, no, I'm not a Kamala fan. I'm not a Biden fan. But to me, this guy is an existential threat. We just got to get him out of office. And, I could go on about my reservations about Kamala, but.
Byron York had a pretty good piece about how he's obeyed every court order that's been handed to him, sort of slavishly. Tweeting is not an existential threat. Disobeying the courts is an existential threat. He hasn't done that. There have been a few signs of autocracy, but really not that many.
Just the destabilizing shit he pulls.
He's destabilizing. I agree with that.
Last week TikTok, this week who knows what.
The post office is a much bigger deal than TikTok.
I was going to bring that up. So here's the way the Washington Post put it. President Trump on Thursday said he opposes both election aid for states and an emergency bailout for the U.S. Postal Service because he wants to restrict how many Americans can vote by mail, putting at risk the nation's ability to administer the November 3rd elections. Now, is it true that he's saying I don't want to give the post office support because I want to reduce the number of people who vote by mail?
I think the charitable explanation is he wants to discourage states from adopting, universal vote by mail schemes where they send a ballot to everybody. And if he could, if it were 6 months ago and he said, look, there's not going to be the money to deliver them, you shouldn't do this, he might dissuade some of them and then it would make sense. But it seems way too late for that now. At this point, the states are sort of committed to how they're going to run the election.
It just seems.
He's just giving. He should fund it and take away the excuse that if the elections are a disaster, that they're a disaster because he didn't fund it.
Right, which is now a real peril for him, don't you think? Politically, as we get as we approach the election day and things are looking like a shit show, he's given the Democrats a strong card to play here, right?
Well, it's a post-election card. It's.
Well, I think the shit show part
will only be obvious it's a shit show the day after the election, right?
No, I think if you're hearing people say, "Oh, the post office is whatever," signs of snafu. that he can be blamed for will be seized on.
It doesn't seem like he's a force for order, and you would think he would be positioning himself with all the riots and the looting and the crime as a force for order.
Now that's a good question. You know, the Bannon crowd. You know, I to make sure I'm not in an echo chamber, I always try to either watch Fox News or listen to the Steve Bannon podcast. They are like, and they often have been a hint of things to come in Trump campaign themes. China's a good example. And they are just going all out on Portland. Of course, last week Chicago got hit with, looting, along the Miracle Mile. But they're calling for Antifa to be deemed a terrorist group, which would mean that, you know, if you give material support to Antifa, you're a criminal, I guess, and material support, the Trump administration, I think, would like to define material support as like letting people say things on Facebook. I mean, no, it may not happen, but you should hear them go on and on. They think this is the theme for Trump to seize on. They want him to bring the hammer down, solve the problem, and get credit for it, and they think that will win the election.
Whether you go that far, it should certainly be a winning theme for Trump that he is against the looting of the Magnificent Mile or whatever it's called in Chicago, and that he's against the incredible rise in murders in New York and in other cities, and that this is the product of Democratic policies and Democratic mayors and all these bail laws that have been passed, et cetera, et cetera. He has a credible case to make, and he doesn't have to start like going crazy about Antifa. The problem with Trump is he always is ham-handedly screws up a good cause. Like, he has a perfectly reasonable case about stopping this initiative to move housing to the suburbs, okay? And instead he does the Bush message, I'm protecting you, suburban housewife. It's like way too blatant. But the problem he has is Jared and the people in the Jared camp, the Koch brothers crowd, they're champions of prison reform, and they worry that if he seems too tough on crime, it'll destroy their attempt to raise Trump's black vote from 8% to 9%.
Is that true?
Yeah, apparently it's true. I mean, I maybe I'm being deceived by my friend Ryan Jerdusky, but it does seem that there are, his initial response to the riots was tempered by Jared saying, "Oh, no, this might cost us the black vote that I've so carefully nurtured." Mm-hmm. So part of one of the big problems with the Trump campaign is Jared, is it cross messages, and other people, like whoever talked to him into proposing a capital gains tax cut, are at cross messages with what a sensible policy would be. And of course, the main problem is Trump. But it would help if he had an advisor who had his ear, who could say, no, this is the message. The message is law and order, populism, anti-China, yes, and let's stick with it.
Well, I agree that I can imagine the law and order issue playing in his favor. There was a conventional wisdom, which I think is still somewhat intact, that inherently civil unrest or unrest generally works against an incumbent administration. And in fact, I think in that book, 10 Keys to the Presidency or whatever, which I think is a kind of a dubious analysis, but where they come up with these 10 boxes you check to determine which candidate is going to win, the incumbent or the other one. I think civil unrest works inherently against the incumbent. I've always thought that was too simple-minded, that Trump may manage to blame Democrats. I think it's a wild card.
The precedent is 92, when the riots worked against Bush and in favor of Clinton, and that situation doesn't completely resonate with me, because the law and order card did not work for Bush. He also played it ham-handedly, of course, and but it was the case that there were fundamental economic problems of the underclass and the ghetto and the inner cities that had gone unaddressed, and people thought, Bush, you haven't addressed them. You've been focusing on foreign policy. it's time to address them. We now have 2 decades of attempting to address these policies, and if we still have riots, I don't think people are going to say, now we really have to figure out what to do about the economy of the ghettos. It's a different situation. I think the law and order card has a shot.
Well, I don't know that people assess it that way. I just think there's the optics have yet to really take final shape before the election, and it depends on what specific Democratic mayors and police chiefs and Democratic appointed police chiefs do and stuff.
But I mean, that is how Clinton interpreted it. He gave a series of speeches saying that we have to deal with the culture of poverty that's sustained by welfare.
Fine, I just don't think the voters. I don't think many voters are looking at this that way.
And Jim Pinkerton was madly trying to get Bush to endorse a job program, which also would have addressed the problem, and Bush didn't. So, I mean, it wasn't just me. Maybe it wasn't the voters.
My take on the George Floyd thing after a couple of weeks of protests, I wrote this in the Nonzero newsletter, was basically, if you look at what the protesters are getting and even what they're demanding, what good does it do the George Floyds of tomorrow? I mean, what good does it do the kids who are being born in George Floyd's shoes, the shoes that led him to be where he was? And I agree. I mean, I guess this sounds like a conservative thing to say. It didn't used to be the case that if you wanted to spend a ton of money, improving education and jobs programs and all kinds of other things, you were conservative. But now it's almost like if you say anything other than police brutality is the problem, you are.
We've reached our first get off my lawn moment.
Yeah, I know. That reminds me.
It's kids these days, Bob. They've abandoned the honest Marxism of our youth, where you address the economic problems and the cultural problems would solve themselves. And instead, they're all cultural. They're all like, is this woke enough? Are we playing enough identity politics and ignoring the fundamental economic realities, which are the primary drivers?
Yeah, Matt Iglesias had a conversation on his podcast with John McWhorter, and Matt said, because John's a linguist, Matt said, it kind of reminds him of do you remember the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis that you would get in like Psychology 101? The idea that language shapes the way you look at reality, so that if your language has 7 different words for blue, you see these different shades of blue. I think it's been kind of largely discredited, but Matt's point was the idea seems almost to be that we can change the reality of the situation by using different words and prohibiting certain words. I mean, they were talking about cancel culture,
right.
So,
right.
But there is, some of that, which also reminds me,
Matt doesn't want the kids on his lawn either.
Matt is I'll tell you, Matt's aging faster than I am. I mean, that's not true, of course. But he has, he signed the Harper's letter, which didn't shock me. I think it's great. I think it's fine. But he was one of the most progressive seeming people who signed the Harper's letter. And like when I tweeted something about, early on, as soon as the defunding the police thing started to take off, I said, man, this is a terrible messaging. This is a good way to get Trump elected, is to start demanding defunding the police. And he chimed in on that, Yeah. But I had an epiphany while listening to that conversation between McWhorter and Matt, and it has to do with the fact that you people like us who are of the get off my lawn age have to come to terms with the fact that the meaning of some words are just changing. And it's interesting the way they're changing. So I'm thinking of the word racism. I mean, you and I think had already talked about the fact that clearly the meaning of white supremacy has changed. When we were young, it meant you were wearing a hood. Now it talks about institutions that just have ingrained these subtle things that kind of de facto wind up, elevating whites. And racism, I finally realized, is kind of, similar. And this started, I was listening to the Washington Post equivalent of the New York Times Daily podcast, which is different from it in interesting ways. Anyway, they were, talking about how this emergency loan program in response to the pandemic had not done as much to help minority business owners as others. And the reporter looked into it and said, basically, minority business owners are saying, no, we don't want the loans. It's like, and that could be because they don't have strong relationships with banks. They don't have as much money, but they're saying we want grants, not loans. And that turns out to be the reason. And in fact, the legislation is written to give explicit preference to minority-owned business. So here's what caught my attention was the way this reporter for the Washington Post wraps up. This is what she says. I think her name is Tracy Jane. And at first I was outraged by this, but then I listened to the McWhorter-Iglesias conversation, and I'll explain why that lessened my outrage. So she says, in summary, the problems that the coronavirus is highlighting are systemic issues that have been happening in America for a very long time, since the beginning of our country's history. So the coronavirus has only served to cast a spotlight on those very real issues of systemic racism, and this is just one of them. So a reporter was deeming a loan program racist when what had happened was minorities chose not to take advantage of it. So it's kind of just maybe de facto discriminatory. But then listening to Matt and John, I realized that the meaning of racism has just changed. And in a weird way, its impact has been weakened because now it applies to just de facto institutional discrimination, a little bit like white supremacy. And so it used to mean you are a bigot. It referred to an actual malicious attitude. And I think the irony... Well, go ahead.
But wasn't she just saying that black businessmen are poorer and have less access to wealth than white businessmen? And that's a legacy of the history of African Americans, all of which is true and doesn't seem all that fresh and new or
No, but calling it... Well, two things. First of all, a reporter deeming anything racist gets back to the way... At first I thought this was a comment on the way journalism has changed. Like, reporters didn't use...
You have to have a paragraph deeming it racist to get into the Washington Post.
Okay, but what I'm saying is, it used to be reporters would never deem a person racist. They would let someone else say that and cite the facts about whatever someone had said. Now,
right.
At first I thought, now reporters label things racist, but then I realized... Actually, the meaning of the word has changed, and so what the reporter could be saying is there is de facto discrimination here. That's not an outrageous thing for a reporter to... A reporter might have said that 30 years ago, and that's what the word racism is coming to mean in some context. That's my point.
I guess that's right, but I mean, it's the ultimate end is that speaking English is racist because English is what helps the whole system function, and the whole system is racist. So we should really stop talking to each other. I mean, it becomes. This is mostly in that Andrew Sullivan essay. It becomes just you can't do anything that's not racist because anything you do that helps the system, you're helping a system that's racist.
Right, and the irony is, I think, with both white supremacists and racists is. The way the language starts to change is people want to expand the power of the terms, apply it more broadly. Like they want to say, this university is white supremacist. And when they first say that, they want it to have all the emotional power that the word white supremacist has. But then in the end, it winds up draining the terms of the emotional power they initially had. You see what I mean?
Correct. I agree with that. And it's also a way to tell people like us, shut up, get out of the way.
Right.
So.
But they can't tell us that because of the masses of people of goodwill who are supporting fiercely independent journalism.
Like the Parrot Room.
For example. No, don't reach for the parrot. You're reaching for the parrot? Go ahead. Give them a treat, Mickey.
It's okay. No, we'll save the parrot.
So... That's that. Now, I don't know, COVID? Foreign policy?
We got a lot of stuff to talk about.
Leon Wieseltier?
No, we're saving Leon for the Parrot Room.
Entirely?
I think. Yeah, I mean...
Part of it's out in the open.
People don't want to hear Leon talked about twice.
I think the issue is interesting, though. I'm not going to get into it, but Leon Wieseltier...
Okay, go ahead.
Former literary editor of the New Republic. Full disclosure, my own personal nemesis, is out of MeToo jail. I guess, right? I mean, that's one interesting question is raised is when is rehabilitation appropriate for various degrees of MeToo kind of miscreants? Anyway, he's starting a quarterly. His first effort like that was derailed by the MeToo allegations, when Lorraine Powell Jobs, who was going to bankroll him and basically owns the Atlantic, pulled out of the project. But he's found some other way to get a quarterly out, and we will, I guess, talk about that. So, somebody complained about us teasing too many things in the parrot room. They thought it was commercially crass or something. So, forget everything we just said. We may not talk about the rest of it.
No, we are not talking. So you don't want to talk about Leon?
Maybe in the parrot room, maybe not.
Well, I definitely want to talk about him at some point.
Well, go ahead and say something, and then we may or may not.
He didn't intimidate anybody. At least we think, and that certainly was my experience. It's not like he's a boss who was pressuring women into having sex, and it's not like he was scaring them and using his power. He was a little creepy, apparently creepier as he got older. But his explanation for how the Me Too movement has gone too far was really awfully good. It's sort of, and I'm reading from it, what were the excesses? The Robespierre haste with which people's heads were chopped off before they could say a word, the fact that an allegation was tantamount to a conviction, the fact that all infractions were treated equally, there was no sense of proportion or sense of measure, and that we developed a culture of unforgivingness. It's a pretty good summary of a lot of what went wrong with the Me Too movement.
He's apparently being forgiven, right? This project of his is being written about semi-respectfully in respectable places.
Well, it should be, and he's a pretty good candidate as the first rehab patient. But it, of course, the other problem with Me Too is it ignores Bob, inherent differences between the sexes and the way men and women get ahead. And it gives no quarter to the way women use their sexuality as sort of a way to compensate for other discriminations they face, and that's just the way the world is. I agree down on one side.
I agree that a part of the story that wasn't written about is that there are women who are happy to do the deal. There definitely are. At the same time, my view is,
I just didn't see any deals. Did you? I didn't see any deals being made at the New Republic anyway.
Well, I don't think it was a deal thing. That's not what's scandalous. It's when women feel pressured who don't want to make a deal.
Right. I just think we're not talking about Leon's case. We're talking about we're not even talking about the CEO of McDonald's whose idea of having sex with his subordinates was one FaceTime encounter. He's still getting fired and sued.
Okay, but some of these people were... Look, there was a huge power differential. Some of these women probably worked directly for Leon. They definitely felt uncomfortable. I mean, there's one, Sarah Wildman, who's somebody I know a little, and I'm sure she's telling...
That's different. That's different.
Well, but the whole point of Me Too is we're going to be more sensitive on that front.
No, I agree with all that. The question is,
then men are going to have to pay the price.
The question, but we're saying there were women who would do the deal, and I'm saying there were no women in that case who were willing to do the deal. I don't know any women who got ahead at the New Republic.
The whole point is, when women are willing to do the deal, that's not the biggest scandal. It's women who don't want any part of it, who steal.
Right, no, I agree with that. I agree with that.
Let me give you just quickly one example. Sarah Wildman testified that she's talking to Leon and he lunges at her. Right. And then when she rebuffs him, he says, "Oh, I knew you'd do that," or something. Well, that's not cool. It was in the office.
I'm not saying it's cool. We're talking about a different thing. We're talking about women who want to do the deal, and I'm saying that is not the case at the New Republic. Forget the New Republic. That didn't happen there. Okay?
You are totally missing my point.
Kamala Harris, there's a much stronger case that she did the deal than that anybody at the New Republic did the deal.
I'm going to say this one more time. I agree that... Who's at the door?
That's the phone.
I agree that's the phone. I agree that part of the story that was not written about for ideological reasons because they wanted it to be a more clear-cut case of men being evil and women not, was that some women are willing to do the deal.
Right.
And fine. But that's the part that isn't so, egregious, and that's the part that doesn't need changing. I mean, that's up to two consenting parties. The part that does need changing are the women who didn't want to be lunged at. That happened at the New Republic.
I agree 100% with that, but the problem with that is that there are a lot of women who want to do the deal and who did the deal and tried to do the deal, and then the guys that wanted to do the deal have now been canceled and MeToo'd and their careers are over. The question is, so it doesn't bifurcate as neatly as you think. There are people who want to do the deal and then turn on their accuser. There are people who want to do the deal unhappy, and somebody else accuses the man or woman, and whoever it is. And so it's an acknowledgement that there are people who want to do the deal would change the way the whole thing is dealt with.
Right, but by that analysis, if your goal is to exonerate Leon, you should be saying there were women there who wanted to do the deal, but by your own account, there weren't.
My goal is not to. I mean,
he actually did marry one of them, so
my goal is not to do the deal. I don't think she wanted to do the deal either. And,
no, I'm not saying she did, but she was an intern originally.
And I'm just saying the New Republic is just that was parrot room. That was parrot room material. Let's forget the New Republic case. I'm saying that, of course, harassing people who don't want to do the deal is bad, but the Me Too movement doesn't acknowledge what you just acknowledged enough, which is people who are willing to do the deal, and that is sort of, I mean, that is the way the world has worked. It may be the way the world shouldn't work. Tell it to Kamala Harris. And it's not completely clear what will replace that deal. But I'm willing to give it a try. We should get rid of that deal. But, just some acknowledgement that there are women who took advantage of it, and they're sort of uncomfortable with the Me Tooism too.
Yeah.
Because they've used that to their advantage their whole lives.
Yeah, so...
I'm not talking about the New Republic. About the New Republic.
No, you did talk about Kamala Harris. I mean, this has been written about a little, but first let me say, so my position is just, there is a sense in which it's unfair the way some of these guys were punished, because back when they started out, and even in some cases back when they did everything they're being accused of, the rules were different. At the same time, they were considered kind of creepy then, and in any event, sometimes the way you have to make it clear that the rules are changing is you punish some people in a way that might not be fair in every sense of the term. Tough luck.
I hit on the interns at the New Republic too. Luckily, I had no power.
Yeah, so, I know. Well, that was the key to your lack of success. That's
the key to my lack of being Me Too'd.
Okay, sorry. Hey, didn't mean to offend you.
Anyway, see, this was a parrot room discussion, Bob. I was right.
Well, it ain't over yet, buddy. There's more. There's more. We can. What I can say in the parrot room is, people are wondering, why is Leon your nemesis, Bob? Well, there's an answer to that question.
Do the sex in public, and then do the sex
in public and Bob's grievances in private.
The Darwinism in private. That'll go over big.
Actually, some person, either a patron or otherwise, suggested we have some kind of grievance feature, and I'm totally in for that.
I mean, we just like where we whine.
Yeah, just whining.
That's what we do all the time anyway. So I have one thing about China, which is I don't understand why people don't. If you're Steve Bannon and Donald Trump, you don't make a big deal of this Celine business. Celine is, I'm an auto nut, and Celine is a famous
electric car.
It's not electric. He's basically a Ford Mustang tinkerer, and he adds turbochargers to Mustangs and makes them incredibly fast. And he also built his own cars, his own like fancy race cars, and he got a deal to build a factory in China to build 4 cars of his own design, and they set up a factory with robots, and And now the Chinese have, according to him, who were minority owners, I think, but they had a big chunk, the local municipality. They've expropriated all his property. They've taken all his patents. They've applied for patents for his ideas. They've cut him out of the factory. It's not his anymore. They've basically screwed him and said, go away. It's ours now, using the COVID virus as an excuse. And this seems like a perfect, if true, it's a perfect example of the sort of behavior that we don't like of the Chinese. It also has implications for Tesla, which has an even bigger factory in China that is subject to this. Now, I got two kinds of feedback on my Twitter feed to this. Like, I don't know why Bannon hasn't made a big deal of this. I mean, if Trump is tweeting ridiculous things about Kamala, why doesn't he tweet a ridiculous thing about Celine? People said, well, screw Celine. He was greedy. He tried to make cars in China, not America. Well, that's a little unfair because he was trying to sell the cars in China. So it seems to me there's a big difference between making cars in China and selling them here and making cars in China to sell to China. And you're allowed to do that. And B, a lot of people said, well, Celine has a shady reputation. There has to be another side to this story. So I accept that possibility that there's another side of the story and that everybody's checked it out and what Celine says isn't true. But I would like to know the other side of the story. There are people in the auto industry who have terrible reputations, like Fisker. There was a car called the Fisker, and it was competing against the Tesla, and everybody said the Fisker isn't going to make it because you can't believe anything he says.
I thought the Fisker was a journalist named Fisk. Remember that when his last name became a verb?
Right,
You've been fisked.
His name was Fisk, and he fisked, so he was a Fisker.
He was a Fisker,
there is a guy named Fisker who would design some of the most beautiful modern cars ever and tried to build an electric car, and his company failed.
Well,
It's now called the Karma. It's still being produced.
Ooh. Sounds like Trump should jump on this Celine thing. I mean, it does sound like it's tailor-made to be this, potent little anecdotal case. It wins, the entire Ford versus Ferrari fan base over and so on.
Exactly.
I have another thing that I'm surprised Trump hasn't exploited, which would be a transition to COVID. Unless you want to talk China more. By the way, I had a China piece in the Nonzero newsletter this week, available at nonzero.org, about the TikTok thing and how TikTok illustrates the irony that although Trump purports to want to weaken authoritarianism in China, everything he does strengthens the devotion of the Chinese people to the authoritarian leadership.
It's all about cognitive empathy.
That's my patron bird.
Oh.
Now that it is said cognitive empathy. Some people have patron saints. I have a patron bird. Patron being a double entendre, Mickey.
There you go. I have something vague, sort of in between what Trump should be doing and COVID, which is in the COVID emergency. Why isn't he showering people with cash? That's a proven way for autocrats like Bolsonaro in Brazil.
He is.
No, he isn't. He cut the benefit from 600 to 200.
Oh, those people.
He should be giving everybody he should have endorsed Kamala Harris's plan to give $2,400 checks instead of $1,200 checks. He should be giving $5,000 checks. Bolsonaro's doing it in Brazil. It's working for him. People are grateful to get the checks. You can buy votes with money. You can't buy all the votes, but you can buy a lot of votes. Why isn't he trying to do it? It's bizarre to me. He's not behaving like an autocrat.
Do you know why my face is so luminous, Mickey?
Plastic surgery?
I don't know. Doesn't it look weird, though?
It does. I don't know why.
Huh. Well, it's not a good look. Yeah, well,
it's fine. It looks like
we've talked about this. I agree. It's a puzzle. I mean, especially now that apparently the reigning economic philosophy of all Americans is the government can just magically create money and it'll never be a problem. But the, what he has done, this is a transition to my thing, is of course he showered these drug companies that have promising vaccines with enough money that they're going to play ball with him, and he's going to do a little October surprise that I think is going to be eerily parallel to the Putin surprise, okay? This Putin vaccine? You've heard about the Putin vaccine.
Yeah, no, you're completely right. That's totally going to happen.
And it's going to be like Putin. He's going to say, I have an announcement. We now have enough results in that I can, through emergency decree, authorize this for certain key personnel, medical personnel, blah, blah, blah. It's going to happen. If it doesn't happen, I'm retiring from the punditry business, and I will return. No, I won't return the Patreon money, but I will retire.
The problem is, I think it's going to happen 2 or 3 times before the election. I think he's going to do it prematurely, and people are going to see through it, and he's going to try it again, and he's going to try it again. It's completely obvious that that's what he'll try. It's a standard political ploy. Remember, Jimmy Carter proclaimed peace with Iran at one point before a key primary with Edward Kennedy. It's a standard desperation move.
Well, that brings us to Israel and UAE. But before we talk about that, let me just say, I'm surprised that Trump has not made a big deal of challenge trials. Remember those? The idea that you can get a vaccine tested much faster if you just take a relatively small group of people and divide them into 2 groups, vaccine, no vaccine, and then expose them all to the virus.
Right,
make sure they get exposed and sit around for 3 weeks and you're done. See, I think that's what I'm on Team Putin, because I'm pretty sure that's what he did in Russia. I'm not vouching for this vaccine. I think Putin would perhaps not be as cautious as I might be, but apparently I read in Science Magazine, only 79 people were involved in testing this. So that has to be a challenge trial, if that's true. And the fact is, 79 people, if you get super clear-cut results, like all of the people vaccinated don't get it, and all the people who aren't vaccinated do get it, you have a quite high degree of confidence that the thing works, and that's what he may have done. And I won't go into this. Maybe Parrot Room permitting, I'll do it there. But there's a thought. There's a way that the famous trolley thought experiment applies to this, and I think kind of helps illustrate or explain why people are, in my view, just almost uniformly rejecting, without any valid ethical grounds, something that would save a lot of lives.
Right. Okay.
Quickly, the other thing is, on hydroxychloroquine, there is now a guy attached to a reputable institution. This guy Risch at Yale Public Health School.
Right.
Who's all in for it.
What does he argue? Does he argue you have to give it early also?
You have to give it early, and you should only give it to people who are in danger. The people who are most in danger of dying, older, pre-existing condition. He's now an intermittent guest on the Bannon podcast. It was very frustrating listening to it, because he's made this claim. He said every test has shown it works. Well, wait a second. We've all seen carefully controlled tests that seem to show it didn't. But the thing about the people on the Bannon podcast is they're so used to just asserting things without any evidence. They're so used to just preaching to people who have drunk the Kool-Aid that they don't ask him to clarify and tell us why it is that some studies seem to show X, where he's asserting Y. It's incredibly frustrating.
It's a general problem.
Well, it's true that the media, I'm telling you, there's a chance that this could be, in retrospect, a mind-blowing fail on the part of the media if it turns out that this drug works.
Did you want to talk about the UAE deal?
Oh, quickly. You don't.
I have a quote from a paraphrase of a quote from Leon Wieseltier that's appropriate. The rehabilitation of Jared Kushner is a heavy price to pay for peace in the Middle East.
Did he say that?
No, he said the rehabilitation of Richard Holbrooke was a heavy price for avoiding genocide in Bosnia.
Yeah, well, it
applies to this case as well.
Well, it doesn't, because this doesn't bring peace to the Middle East. It doesn't change the game. Well, there are people who think
it's a joke.
I'm sorry. I get pretty emotional about the Middle East. Just quickly, it may be important. It's new and seemingly significant for an Arab state, aside from Jordan and Egypt, to recognize Israel. And I guess both of them have actually recognized it, as opposed to maybe signing treaties without recognizing. Anyway, but as somebody put it on Twitter, I even wrote it down. Somebody named Khalid El-Gendi, E-L-G-I-N-D-Y. In practical terms, there's very, very little difference. what was de facto normalization is now de jure. In other words, they were already de facto allies, UAE and Israel, against Iran. And what was going to be de jure annexation is still de facto. And that's true too. I mean, Israel basically, it ain't giving back the part that it was going to annex ever, ever, ever. And someday it will probably annex it. Tom Friedman just went, just almost had an orgasm on the pages of the New York Times praising the thing. And I don't know if he's changed or if I'm only slowly coming to realize kind of how far right he's been on Israel. I think I've come to realize that the New York Times itself as an institution is more right wing on this than I had appreciated, both in the news pages and in the opinion section.
Does this do anything to solve Israel's long-term problem of at some point they'll be outvoted by the Arab population?
No, it doesn't.
Well, I mean, maybe they could, I don't know, maybe it makes some solutions easier, like lopping off putting all the Arabs in one part of Israel and saying, okay, this isn't Israel anymore? No? Can't say that? Okay.
Well, I mean, that would be a variant of a two-state solution, I guess. But there's no, it's too late for a two-state solution. As I told John Kerry in 2010, by the way.
He called you up?
No, I found myself sitting to him next on an airplane right after I came back from Israel on a left-wing tour of Israel, run by Matt Duss, who became Bernie Sanders' foreign policy advisor, and Michelle Goldberg was there. But anyway, he didn't listen. Did he
take your advice?
He spent a lot of time trying to get a two-state solution. But wait, just quickly. So this is, I mean, it's kind of amazing. So Bibi threatens to do something illegal, annex the thing. I mean, the occupation is itself illegal. It violates the Geneva Convention. But he threatens to do this illegal thing. And then UAE says, if you don't do the illegal thing you were threatening to do, we'll give you this thing. And then they get praised for it. It's like, it's worse than saying to somebody who takes a hostage, if you don't kill them, we'll give you $1 million. Because in this case, you knew he wasn't going to kill the hostage. Bibi, it had become politically infeasible for him to do the annexation for a variety of reasons, and not just because Trump had gotten cold feet. It isn't just that. So I don't know. It's kind of weird, but read Tom Friedman if you want to be convinced that it's a huge deal.
I haven't read very much about it. Is there any evidence that Jared's initiatives paid off at all?
Well, that's the Tom Friedman case.
He mentions Jared?
Totally. He says Jared created an asset out of thin air, a negotiating asset. I mean, I don't know if Tom's playing footsie with Jared. I don't know if he's going to get great information or scoops in return or what.
Well, that is one reason people play footsie with Jared. Jared is advised by people. It's possible he lucked into some progress.
Well, I do think he made lemonade out of a lemon in a way.
I mean, like I say, his immigration plan was good too. I mean, he would have probably accepted if it was bad, but it actually happened to be good by accident. So
it's just I guess what kills me is like Jared was going to bring peace in the sense of Israel and the Palestinians, and this makes that only more remote. Yeah. In my view, I could get into that, but that's the irony. And Tom doesn't even get into that. It's like he doesn't even, he shows no sign of caring anymore about the Palestinians. No real sign.
You know what my crazy take is? My take's so crazy that it destroys my reputation as a serious person.
That wouldn't have to be that crazy. What is it?
Epstein.
Oh, sure this isn't Parrot Room?
Where's the Epstein angle?
On the UAE normalizing relations with Israel?
There's a lot of evidence that he was living in the Middle East. His plane came back from that area when he landed and was arrested. Some people say he was living in Saudi Arabia or UAE or someplace around there. He had a picture of MBS on his wall, and he was let's assume that the paranoia, he was also in cahoots with the Mossad. So he was sort of an early living embodiment of the de facto alliance between the Gulf Arab Sunni states and Israel. And, for all we know, maybe he egged it on a little. He should get the Nobel Peace Prize, Bob.
Jeffrey Epstein, that is a take that's a slate pitch.
I own that take.
And it will be yours alone forever.
It's not really my take. I'm just suggesting it.
Is there any Ghislaine news?
There was some Ghislaine news. She's been taken off suicide watch, and there's an article on how she survives in prison that I haven't read.
Okay.
I have a get off my lawn take on the post office. I mean,
before you say, let me set the stage for you saying get off your lawn, okay? It was some commenter a couple of weeks ago said toward the end we had morphed from the Odd Couple to Grumpy Old Men. There's that. Although I think in Grumpy Old Men, Tony Randall was not in Grumpy Old Men, right? So that doesn't refer to me. I think that maybe she meant you. But the other thing is, in the sweepstakes, to come up with the most appropriate analogy to you and me, somebody mentioned, who is it? Waldorf and Statler or something. Do you know who they are?
No.
I think they're grumpy, cantankerous Muppets. Okay, So that's it. Go ahead.
Here's a question. Are we recording this? I'm not seeing any clock.
Oh, dude, don't scare me. Yeah, we're recording it.
Okay, good.
Whether you're recording your thing, I don't know, but that's not quite
not important
if you're not. Yeah.
As always, I'm epiphenomenal. My millennial take on the post office is I was talking to a postman who said, first, you never hear the side of this new postmaster he's put in. Like, what's he trying to do? Presumably he's trying to do more than just screw up the election. He also wants to somehow make the post office more efficient. And, he is a businessman with an experience and track record of success. The press never reports what he's actually trying to do. He cut back on overtime. He said no more overtime. Overtime is what they use to actually get the mail delivered. So as a result, the mail is piling up and being delayed. This postman I talked to said the problem is millennials don't show up at work. They figured out how to game the system, calling in sick, blah, blah, blah. And then people like him, who's not a millennial, get called in on overtime to actually get the mail delivered. And now this millennial disease has infected the whole post office. So basically, nobody's showing up at work, and all the work is done on overtime. And so that's what this guy was fighting. He was trying to get people to show up for work and not rely on constant, expensive overtime to get the work done. And not a crazy thing to do. So that's the anti-millennial take on the post office.
Well, yeah, that's good millennial bashing. It's true. I think that there's very limited power to discipline subordinates in the post office. I knew a guy who was running the post office in a particular town. It's like their kid was a playmate of our kid, and he caught a guy who worked at the post office opening letters and reading them. Because they came from his ex-wife or something, opening letters and reading them, and he couldn't fire him. So it's not easy to those millennials know when they've got the upper hand, and they've got it.
Right.
Wily.
And I also have a take on Trump's executive orders. I know you were waiting for that.
Which ones? Not TikTok? Later than that?
No, the COVID talks broke down, And Trump said, that's okay. I can do it all through executive orders.
Okay, yeah. Getting money to Americans, right.
The two big ones are he delayed the payroll tax, and he says he's going to send $300 to unemployed people instead of $600, and the states are going to, he hopes, make up add $100 to that, so it'll be $400. This is all a dangerous. I think both those things are completely constitutionally questionable, and it's all the outgrowth of this disastrous Justice Roberts decision in the DACA case, where he basically said, "Look, what you did was illegal, but it created facts on the ground and reliance interests, and so you can't just overturn an illegal executive act. You have to jump through all these ridiculous hoops, and what's more, it's like the Roach Motel. We may let you get the regulation in, but then you can't get the regulation out." So, and Trump sort of took this to heart under the advice of Berkeley law professor John Yoo and said, "Hey, I'm going to have my roaches in the Roach Motel. I'm going to issue a lot of regulations and let my successor try to undo them, huh?" So the way this is going to play out, in theory, is he has this regulation giving an extra $300 or delaying the payroll tax, which is a big problem for business, because do they really not collect the payroll tax? And if they collect the payroll tax and it's deferred, what do they do with the money? They just put it in like some bank account, waiting for like a future. Aren't they going to be sued about that? I mean, it's a huge hornet's nest. So somebody's going to sue and say this is all unconstitutional, which I think it should be. I think the court somebody should be able to say, look, you're not carrying out the statute. You're the president. You're supposed to carry out the damn statute. Okay. And the conventional wisdom is that it's an unpopular lawsuit to bring. So the Democrats aren't going to bring it because are they really going to try to take away $300 that Trump is sending to people? And B, that Justice Roberts, they'll find some anti-Trump judge to enjoin it and say, sorry, I've stopped this program. You can't go on with this program. And then it gets taken up to the Supreme Court. And the conventional wisdom is Justice Roberts will get rid of the injunction because Justice Roberts, it would be consistent with his earlier opinion, which is to let the bogus regulation stand. And according to Josh Blackman, who I got this theory from, Roberts has a bias for preserving the status quo. So Justice Roberts is going to vaporize the anti-Trump injunction, and the people are going to get their $300. And, we'll be further down the road of the John Yoo change in the Constitution, which is instead of Congress legislating and the president executing, the president will be doing the legislating. I think, no, that's not going to happen. Roberts is going to vaporize the injunction. No, he's going to uphold the injunction. Sorry, he's going to uphold the injunction and stop Trump's actions, because I think he realizes he's created a monster and you need to kill the monster right now before it upends the entire Constitution.
Roberts does.
Roberts does, yeah. And so Roberts will say, look, that was just a one-time thing for the DACA people. Forget it, Trump. This is unconstitutional. You're over-asserting your executive authority. And we can talk about it next term, but in the meantime, the injunction stands. So that's a weird Mickey prediction that I've been wrong before, that Roberts is going to let a court enjoin Trump's executive actions.
Well, I think Roberts is also very reluctant to let the court seem indulgent of Trump generally, leaving aside the constitutional issues. I think, like, he's who I'm counting on if there's any kind of close call about the election itself. Yeah. And he's shown that. I mean, he spoke out publicly against Trump. Maybe I forget if it was text or subtext, but it was totally clear.
That's a fact. I mean, sometimes he has let Trump get away with things like building the wall and like the travel ban. So he's sort of the unacknowledged legislator of America. But he is not entirely pro-Trump. I agree.
What I don't get about the difficulty Congress is having in reaching some kind of deal on relief for the American people is You know, we think of the Democrats and Republicans as playing a zero-sum game because there's only two parties, but actually there are times when incumbents generally are playing a non-zero-sum game because if people get pissed off enough, they'll vote all the incumbents out of office. So Democrats and Republicans in Congress sometimes have common cause. I would think this might be one of them. But
no, I think if you vote all the incumbents out, the Democrats win big. They win the White House and the Senate. So,
well, yeah, but the individual Democrats, well, no, but by definition...
Well, there's 5 of them.
Well, actually, if you literally vote all the incumbents out, then the Senate becomes Democrat and the House becomes Republican.
Right, okay, that's not going to happen.
But that's not going to happen. That's not my point. My point is I would think that there would be a large number of people in both parties who are worried about blowback from just not reaching any kind of deal.
I think there are some, but in general, this is incredibly crude. I think the Democrats are happy if people are pissed off and
really?
The COVID rages and the economy's in the tank. And they think that's everything around us in all of society is directed to one end, Bob, and that is getting rid of Trump. And they think that is the most propitious atmosphere to get rid of Trump. And so if there were a normal year and he were a normal president, they would have cut a deal. But they're happy to basically have a certain amount of suffering if it serves the greater good of getting rid of Trump.
You're so cynical. You're so cynical. But
I do think that's true.
But it seems like you fairly often see the headline, Democrats reject deal, right? I mean, don't you more often see that than you see Republicans reject deal? I would think that for Nancy Pelosi, that's a bad headline.
You would think, and you think Trump could drive that home, but he seems incapable of doing it.
He's spending all his time on his big challenge trials speech.
He knows the challenge trials speech by heart because he doesn't stick to the facts. He'll say, "We have a vaccine, it all works. The COVID's going to go away. Vote for me." That's basically the speech.
I'm telling you, there's a lot of wild cards yet to come in this campaign. And here's just quickly back to Kamala, like, is there a danger of her? She seems pretty young and vibrant. In fact, younger and more vibrant than probably the average 55-year-old. But is there a danger of her making Biden look particularly old and not?
Yes, although I think the Biden people are well aware of that, and I think she's been instructed not to do that. She can be very effective if she sticks to her script. She was very effective at the introduction. She made the lawyerly case against Trump. She could be nastier than Biden without seeming to be completely nasty herself. And if she sticks to the things that are written for her, she will be very effective. Mm-hmm. But the problem is she's Eve Harrington. She's an ambitious person who eventually it will come out that she wants to be president really, really badly and doesn't want to wait around until Biden gives her the signal. And the sooner that comes out, the worse it is for her. And also, I just don't think she's that appealing. It's not a question of making Biden look bad. That might happen. But why do we have to have presidential candidates who can dance? Maybe this is another get off my lawn moment.
Inauguration
ball. All on the fucking Ellen show now? I mean, candidates have to be able to dance to be president? I mean, all the videos of Kamala dancing didn't do her any good in the primaries, and those were Democrats, okay? I just think there's a huge possibility that the dogs won't like the dog food, as they say. And
wait, who are the dogs in this metaphor?
It's a standard old chestnut about the advertising industry, about how I don't understand. We advertised this dog food with a $5 million campaign. We got all the influencers on board. Why is this dog food failing? And the answer is the dogs don't like it. Okay.
Do you remember when Ed McMahon on the Johnny Carson show used to actually feed Alpo to dogs live?
No.
Once when they wouldn't eat it, he had to get down and demonstrate, and then the dog ate it.
He probably had some secret pheromone on his fingers. That would be my main worry about Biden, but that's easily solved. You downplay Kamala and you send her on the less big venues. That's what they did with Dan Quayle. So she's not going to kill him, It's just she's a bad choice maybe for his, there are other choices that would have helped him more, and she's going to be a problem if they win in terms of dealing with her in the White House.
Yeah. I don't know about that. Jeez.
I mean, Biden really served the purpose in the Obama administration. He was the guy who could go to the Senate and sell the deal. Kamala is not the guy who's... Is Biden really going to value Kamala's advice? No. Her track record of judgment is awful.
Look, it's not in her interest to undermine his presidency unless it starts looking after year 2 like he's going to try to become a 2-term president, which I kind of doubt. Other than that, I mean, she's fine being a good soldier because she's the heir apparent. She doesn't need to cause trouble.
You may be right.
Well, on that note, Mickey...
There's a poem called "The Snake" that Trump would read about how sometimes people
I know. We all know that
overcomes their rationality and they do things that are destructive that cause their own demise because they're snake-like.
I'm not sure that wasn't this more about not recognizing a peril, an evident peril? God, he recited that at every rally in 2016.
Well, there's a version of the snake about a scorpion who stabs somebody in mid-river, and they both die, but the scorpion can't help it because the scorpion's a scorpion.
Man, this guy's got to go. I'm not going to ask you, Mickey. I'm going to charitably not ask you if you're still thinking about voting for him. I'm not going to ask you. The question's not on the table. You don't have to answer it.
As you know, my main thing is I want him to get close enough to preserve the Senate Republican.
So you want him to lose by a few votes?
By, 5 votes. So then it'll be a disaster for the country. He has to lose by barely enough. This probably is a null set. He has to lose by enough so that there's not a prolonged contest, but not enough to lose the Senate for the Republicans.
Okay, so we should probably start winding it down. After all, we have a whole Parrot Room episode.
Well, I've gone through my suggested topics, but how long have we been going on? I can't see.
Almost an hour and 15.
Okay, well.
But let me say a couple of things quickly. One is, I did do, as I think I said last time, this live stream, my first ever YouTube live stream, about cognitive empathy. This was in memory of Michael Brooks, the kind of leftist, young lefty host of the Michael Brooks show. And he passed away unexpectedly because of a blood clot, it turns out, 3 weeks ago. This grew out of that because I was scheduled to be on his show. I was going to talk about cognitive empathy. It wound up being the case that his mother joined us. So it was really, that's the interesting part, is the last 45 minutes. Anyway, that's on YouTube if you want, on the Meaning of Life channel if you want to watch it. And then I'm doing another live stream this Thursday at 8 with Josh Summers, who was also on board that time. And we're going to get more deeply into the whole question of, cognitive empathy, mindfulness. It applies to foreign policy and domestic politics and stuff. So, you can look at my Twitter feed at Robert Writer, on Thursday if you want to see details about what you click on to see that. That's my self-promotion. Do you have self-promotion, Mickey?
No, that's my problem.
We should do a little Patreon talk quickly.
We have this Patreon where we sort of like the after party where we talk about whether the show went well, and I think it's a danger. It's a danger of people who see the free show feeling shortchanged because all the good stuff is in the Parrot Room.
Isn't that exactly what we want, Mickey?
No,
no,
because then we're shits. I think
most of America's successful people are shits.
Okay. We're not looking for a whole lot of success. We don't have to be Joe Rogan here.
No.
So I don't want to hit the Parrot Room is I thought it was a good balance last week of stuff that was interesting, but not, it didn't steal from the regular.
Well, let me
Wright show blogging
a countervailing view is this, from patron Mark. I have to unlearn the lesson of Chekhov's gun. I guess, Chekhov said if you see a gun in the first act, it'll go off in the last act or something. And then he says, the Lady Gaga sex doll did not make an appearance in the parrot room. Apparently we alluded to that. Can we promise to talk about that? Do you have it there? Do you have a Lady Gaga sex doll? Don't bring it on now. Don't. No. It's parrot room material.
It's somewhere in the pile of crap that's to my left here.
We take a break in between this and the parrot room.
Okay. If you insist on the Lady Gaga sex doll, I'll find it. But I won't necessarily find it.
Will it take time to inflate it, or is it inflated?
It's tiny. It's like the parrot is as big as the Lady Gaga.
Don't give away too much.
Anyway. I may not find it, but I'll try.
Let me quickly say a couple of things. One is, I was wrong, and I'll elaborate in the parrot room, but I was wrong to say that you can't get the parrot room thing in a podcast app. You can. There's a way we can send you a secret link, and so I'll elaborate on that in the parrot room. You can get it on most podcast apps. There's various ways you can, if you want to just listen to the parrot room, do it more conveniently than you may be aware of. I should also say, last time I said, we don't have a multi-tier system. It's just like $5 a month, and that's true. We don't. I should emphasize that you're allowed to give us more money if you want. And in fact, I was gratified to see that without us even mentioning that, some people did give more than $5. There were, and that's very generous. But, I would just, I would say there's no ceiling on the generosity that people are allowed to display in my presence, as a rule. But really, seriously, thank you to everybody. It's heartening, and I guess now on to the parrot room.
It's a big deal if you can survive as an independent non-MSM sort.
Totally.
Because the MSM has gone so crazy.
Oh man, it's bad.
That you would want this to happen. So thank you.
No,
yes,
plus I keep saying more and more things that poison the well, even in this, let alone the parrot room. I mean, I've already antagonized several people today.
I actually have a guaranteed cancel Mickey point to make, which I'll also make
in the parrot room.
I will also make in the parrot room, but you're going to slap me down so quickly.
Cancel Mickey. I'm writing it down so you don't forget. Great tease. So, the URL is patreon.com/parrot room, one word. And, so we will see patrons there. But, we remain grateful to everyone who watches us or listens to us, whether or not they're patrons. We love everyone, don't we?
Yeah, I think it's, well.
Oh, speaking of which, final love thing. This from a patron. Liz says, love you, Bob, 3 exclamation points. I am a huge fan, and Mickey is growing on me. Mickey, there are a number of warning signs that you've been spending too much time in the parrot room, and that may be one of them. You're growing on her.
Mickey is growing on me.
Mickey is growing on me.
And that was, and that you get for free. Imagine what you have to pay, what you get if you pay. That was, thank you, Mickey.
This poor parrot. Okay.
Okay. So we'll see you in the parrot room.
Great.
Okay.